Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Red Gaming Tech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully, you're having an amazing day. We've got a ton of stuff to get through in today's video. I want to begin, though, with, well, bad news, actually, and it's for the RX 6000 series. As of the time that I'm recording this, we don't actually know the gaming performance of the cards, at least from third-party reviews. Obviously, we have AMD's official numbers, but there is, of course, lots of excitement to see what the RDNA 2 architecture can actually bring to the table. It's great that AMD will have a competitive solution against NVIDIA's RTX 30 series, but the bad news, well, I guess some of you may like the news, depending on if you mine or not. The RX 6800 is considerably faster than the RTX 3090 in mining. And we're going to discuss that in just a moment, but first, a quick word from this video's sponsor. Today's sponsor is Boost Gaming. At Boost Gaming, you can purchase wallet top-ups for PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, as well as Spotify. This website works in cooperation with these companies officially, so you can be confident of your purchase. If you want to help support the channel, you can use the affiliate link which is found in the description box below. But that said, let's jump in to the AMD news. This information has been originally posted on QQ, which is an ironic name, but there we go, and has since been reprinted by Chip Hell, although I am reading this from videocards.com, so I will link both Chip Hell and videocards.com in the description. To be clear, we are referring to the 6800 non-XT, and this is important because the non-XT card retails at a shade under $600, it's $579. This is compared to the RTX 3090, which costs about $1,500 US. Obviously, these prices will vary depending on the region that you are from, and also if you purchase a more expensive AIB model. But in terms of the RTX 3090, the profitability, including electricity cost, is shade over $3 a day. It's about $3.40 a day. But this is going to be considerably less than the 6800 because allegedly the 6800 is 50% faster than the RTX 3090. Which means you could easily reach figures of about $5 US per day, which obviously means that you would reach profitability much sooner because you also have the fact that the card itself is about a third of the cost, obviously considerably cheaper. It is important to note that this has not been officially confirmed yet, as, again, the cards have not been made readily available, but it does seem to indicate that this is true, and if it is, oh boy, it's going to mean very interesting things for AMD's stock allocation. Obviously, when it comes to graphics cards, actually hardware launches, just in general recently, it's been, well, basically a roll of the dice. I got very lucky with the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. However, despite actually having the 5900X seemingly in my cart and the order going through, and then actually getting an email to be told that I was going to get the CPU basically the day after launch, well, that just didn't happen, and apparently I got put on back order for a couple of weeks for the 5900X, and this is not a sob story. Tons of people are, of course, experiencing very similar things with just a massive demand for components. Fortunately, though, I do think AMD are getting better in terms of the demand for the Ryzen 5000 series, but it's going to be very interesting if this is true for the RDNA 2, what the demand is going to be for these GPUs, particularly for the higher-end SKUs. I mean, just imagine, for example, the 6900 XT in terms of sheer demand. This definitely could suck an awful lot. And not just from the perspective of gamers who want to support AMD, but just honestly someone who just wants to buy a card. I know a ton of people who don't really give a crap if they buy an NVIDIA card, an AMD card. They just want an upgrade from the current GPU they've had because they've just been sitting on it. And there are a lot of reasons to wait, of course. PCIe 4 now is now becoming prolific. Obviously, Rocket Lake is also going to support PCIe 4 when it does limp to the scene next year. We also have the fact that these next generation cards are obviously much faster than their predecessors. Plus, pricing is a lot better. This time around. So it's definitely going to suck if the cards are either gobbled up by scalpers, or even worse, I guess to some people, they are just being used for mining. So hopefully this is not the case. But I imagine that miners are going to be eyeing these things absolutely. Also, an interesting story that's been floating around for the PlayStation 5 concerns storage. It's fair to say that storage for the next generation is going to be, well, I'll just say interesting. Clearly, the fact that games are not exactly small, NBA 2K21, for example, is another title which has just recently announced the size of its install, and on the Xbox Series X, it's over 120 gigabytes, which I'm sure you'll agree is absolutely ginormous, and of course, this is going to be very consistent, I feel, through the next generation. I've said before that it's not unlikely that we'll see consoles which have larger density drives. So for the Xbox, of course, this means 2 terabytes. For the PlayStation 5, it will mean 1.6 terabytes of space. But there is an interesting blog post from Sony, and of course I'll link it in the video description. They have said that currently PlayStation 5 games cannot be stored on a USB drive. Well, more to the point, you cannot transfer them anyway to a USB drive. However, while you won't be able to play a PS5 game from a USB drive, simply because obviously there is such a difference in storage speed, what they do want is for you to be able to, at the very least, transfer a game from the internal drive to a USB drive. And apparently this is currently underway in terms of development, and it does mean that you won't have to re-download like 100 gigabytes plus of data just if you need to make space in the short term. You can, though, as Sony stressed once again, store PlayStation 4 titles on a USB drive which is connected to the PS5. But honestly, it's really a case of just needing to manage the space the best you can. They've also stated that PS5 features an expansion port that will, in the future, enable players to add M.2 storage to be used to install games on the PS5. But this SSD storage upgrade functionality will come to the PS5 after launch as part of a system software update. We'll share more details of this in the future, including which types of M.2 SSD drives will be compatible with the PS5. On day one, you will be able to connect a compatible USB drive and then use it to store and play your PS4 games, and you'll be able to play PS4 games while they remain stored on this external device. But PS5 games, again, they reiterate that they need to reside on the PS5's internal SSD. But, as they mentioned a moment ago, you will eventually be able to transfer games to that SSD, but you will not be able to play PS5 games from the external SSD, in other words, a USB device. And so we're in this really weird situation with the PS5, where if you want to be able to play PS5 games, you're going to have to manage a fairly meager amount of space, which is not an ideal situation. I kind of feel that it's, well, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I think it kind of sucks that the external upgradability, or should I say the internal upgradability for an M.2 was not available at launch. Hopefully it's not long after launch. I mean, for all we know, it could happen in just a couple of weeks' time, and hopefully that is the case, given we're only looking at around 670 gigabytes of usable space on the PlayStation 5. And again, it's not much better on the Xbox as well, so it's going to be a very interesting generation, I feel. I do wonder, especially for like the Xbox Series X, if we're going to have this situation where people have like 2 or 3 SSDs that they just plonk into their system. It's going to feel a little bit like the PlayStation 2 era again, where you go around your friends with like memory cards, and you're like, "Hang on a minute, I can't remember which game is on which memory card," and you're like trying to remember out of the 3 or 4 memory cards. Um, with of course, Microsoft have also confirmed that larger density SSDs will become a thing, but obviously with upgradable storage for the PlayStation 5, because you can use M.2 drives, you can also use a larger density drive, so you wouldn't need to stick to like 1 terabyte. You could use 2 terabytes or whatever, but again, so need to approve this and actually release an update for you to utilize it. And I would like to also discuss a story that's been floating around the internets. And this story originates from another YouTube channel posting an image of the internals of the Xbox Series X, as they're going to be doing a teardown of the system. This channel is Modern Vintage Gamer, and they were sent a console early by Microsoft. I will link, of course, their channel in the video description. Now, if you look at the actual PCB, there's a lot of cool stuff here. On the right-hand side, you can see the heatsink and so on of the console, but while underneath the heatsink is the main SoC, one of the things that's been getting a lot of attention is the Xbox One chip. And there are 2 part numbers here you can actually Google. The first is M11, very little pops up. The second begins with T6W. And if you Google that part number, it seems to be a variant of a retimer chip that was found on the Xbox One, which is for HDMI retiming. Now, I'm fairly certain that it's serving a very similar purpose here for the Xbox Series S. I do not have a Series S to tear down, and to be honest with you, I'm making assumptions that because the part numbers are so damn similar, the chip is basically a variant of that. Now, I want to be clear, this chip is not doing anything in terms of processing, let's say, graphics on the system. It is not a CPU, it is not a GPU, which is part of course, the APU itself, which is not visible on that particular image. So this particular chip has nothing to do with the performance, and it's not really a big deal, honestly. Microsoft are using this. I mean, with the what one? PlayStation 2. The PlayStation 2 had actually the I/O. Had a PS1 chip being used on the console for backwards compatibility, and it served as the I/O input-output processor of the system, and it was actually still using the original PlayStation CPU, albeit that CPU could run at a couple of different clock frequencies. It's based on the MIPS architecture. It was the R3000A, so it could run at either 33.8 MHz or 37.5 MHz, again, depending on what it was doing, whether it was playing PlayStation games or whether it was performing I/O functionality on the system. So basically, it was just reutilizing the same chip, and it was a quite smart way for Sony to implement backwards compatibility from for the PS2, obviously because the PS2 and PS1 architectures in terms of the CPU and other things were actually rather different from one another. So this was a pretty smart method for Sony to achieve that. So with the Xbox, it seems to be HDMI retiming. And even if it isn't, it's nothing to do with the actual performance of the console. The reason I'm covering this is because a ton of people seem to be getting really confused over this chip and why it's actually present on the console, so I'm just quickly covering it here. Also, a quick note is that MVG did state that it could also be a south bridge of some description on the console, so there is that possibility. But given what we find when we search for the part number, I think it's fairly obvious anyway that the chip itself is nothing to do with the actual APU or anything like that. Also, while I'm at it, there is one small other piece of Xbox news, and that is that Halo 4 is going to be coming to the Master Chief Collection on the PC next week. Definitely one of the strengths of the PlayStation brand has been the exclusives. Titles such as Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, and so on have just been really absolutely monumentally important in the momentum of the PlayStation brand. But of course, Microsoft have not just been sitting on their hands and have recently purchased ZeniMax, which means companies like id Software and Bethesda are now under their umbrella, and they have definitely been flexing their financial cash. But there's a very interesting trend that we've been noticing recently from Microsoft, and they seem to be putting renewed focus on the Japanese market. And indeed, the Xbox Series X as well as S actually sold out very quickly in Japan, which honestly I wouldn't have called. In fact, the only Xbox which has actually done pretty well in Japan, especially in the early years, was the original Xbox, and this of course was helped not not least of which because companies like Sega were pumping out games. So of course we saw Panzer Dragoon Auto, which I think is a fantastic game by the way. Shenmue 2 of course got released, Dead or Alive, which obviously is not Sega, but still, you get the point. However, there is a story that's been floating around from Bloomberg. They have reported that several Japanese-based game developers, small to large, have basically Microsoft approached them and have said that they wish to acquire their purchase. Now, these studios have not wanted to go on record, so we do not know which studios these are, so I'll leave that speculation down to you. But Microsoft have already said that if they found a nice Asian studio, they would be very happy to purchase it. Now, bear in mind that this would be a very smart decision for multiple reasons for Microsoft. ZeniMax has a ridiculous number of really good IPs. I mean, we all know Doom, we all know Fallout, we all know, Wolfenstein, and all of these other cool games. Hell, even Evil Within, which I think is a really underrated title. Great great Japanese-ish RPG. Oh, sorry, survival horror game, not RPG. But if you think about it, having a couple of Japanese studios to appeal to a different demographic would make an awful lot of sense, and having a JRPG, for example, would be absolutely incredibly important for Microsoft, I feel. Now, what studios would be purchased, that is a completely different question. I mean, Sega have been rumored like 2 trillion times at this point, and honestly, I think that it's not unlikely that they are one of the studios that Microsoft have spoken to. These conversations do happen not infrequently, though. And just because a conversation happens where you're trying to judge interest or what it would take to make a deal go through, it doesn't mean a deal will go through. That is important to realize. So just because Sega, for example, have been approached, it doesn't mean that Microsoft will purchase the studio. Obvious candidates would be Sega. Capcom as well would be pretty damn amazing, and we can go through an entire laundry list of different studios that would make a great fit for Microsoft. I don't necessarily know how it will affect gaming in the long run, though. Sony have also flexed their financial might as well many times in the past. So I think when it comes to these type of situations of like buying studios and exclusivity, I do understand both perspectives, because if you don't have exclusives, people will not buy into your ecosystem. But then again, exclusives are just that. They stop others from playing those experiences. So I do think it's frustrating. And from my perspective, who is buying an Xbox and a PlayStation, but honestly, I mostly play on PC, it doesn't really affect me too much. I'll just play on whatever platform, but I do realize that that is a very privileged position, and a ton of people don't get that choice. They'll make their decision of PlayStation or Xbox, and it's quite a difficult decision, because if you do only get to play on one system, and goodness knows I felt like this when I was a kid, like, I would have loved to have picked up a Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, or I was a little young then, or a PlayStation 1 and an N64, but I just couldn't do it. Even if I had managed to convince my parents to like throw down the money to buy an N64 after they just bought like the year before a PlayStation, because the Sega Saturn I'd already purchased because I thought that was going to be the win because I was quite a Sega fan. At that point, the Saturn was obviously pretty dead. So I now had a PlayStation, and I was just drooling over games like GoldenEye. My friend actually had an N64, and I played GoldenEye, and I played games like Mario 64, and I was drooling. I wanted that system so damn bad. But there was no way in hell, even if I could ask my parents to, buy the console for me, which they'd probably drop-kick me, to be honest. Even if I could have convinced them to purchase the system, there's no way that as a kid, just getting essentially pocket money for chores or whatever, there was no way I could also buy games for both systems. It just wasn't going to happen. So I basically made my PlayStation bed and I lay in it. And yeah, so I do understand what it's like to just not have the ability to play on all of those systems. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the next generation does start to unfold. And I think that's just about it for this particular video. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. I should be receiving my Xbox Series X tomorrow, and I've also been told that my PlayStation 5 will be shipping out pretty soon. I'm really looking forward to the PS5 arriving. I'm also rather looking forward to the Xbox arriving as well, and doing some testing, and honestly just playing some games. I pre-ordered Demon's Souls and Spider-Man for the PlayStation 5. As I've mentioned before on the channel, I never actually played through the original Spider-Man, so I picked up the Ultimate Edition, and I'm rather looking forward to going through that. I think I'm going to play through the original version first before I touch Miles Morales. And for the Xbox, I've got Watch Dogs as well as Assassin's Creed incoming. So there'll be some really cool content on the channel, not just like graphics comparisons, but some other really cool stuff. And of course, a lot of focus on PC stuff as well. With all of that said, though, thank you very much for watching the video. If you've enjoyed it, of course, consider giving the video a like and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.